My name is Luke, and these are my colleagues, Dalton, Brandon, Izzy, and Sawyer. We are here today to discuss roots and resiliency, using controlled burns and food forestry to meet the climate and food sovereignty goals of the Monacan Indian Nation. The Monacan Indian Nation is a state and federally recognized tribe that descended from eastern Sioux and woodland Indians. The Monacan have called Central Virginia their home for over 10,000 years.
The Monacan Indian Nation is represented by over 2,600 tribal citizens and owns around 200 acres in Bear Mountain and Amherst County, with facilities like the tribal government headquarters, the tribal hall, the Monacan Ancestry Museum, and the food bank. They recently acquired around 1,300 acres at the Laurel Cliff property. This property has rolling hills, fields, forests, and a small pond. Tributaries of the James River flow throughout and are commonly used for recreational and cultural purposes. The forest, covering around 900 acres, include mixed deciduous forests and pine stands ready for harvest. Laurel Cliff faces many challenges, including poor soil health from historical land use, a risk of wildfire, and the future impact of climate change.
As the Earth's surface reflects sunlight in the form of infrared energy back to its space, some can be absorbed by greenhouse gases in the atmosphere and re-radiated back to the surface, increasing global temperature. This process, though necessary for life on Earth, has become negatively impacted by human processes. According to the Environmental Protection Agency, climate change is the long-term shift in temperatures and weather patterns caused by an increase in buildup of greenhouse gases like carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. Anthropogenic sources of CO2 include pollution from industrialization, deforestation, and vehicle emissions. Impacts of global climate change include prolonged droughts and the increasing unpredictability of severe weather patterns. Storms become more intense, dropping increased amount of rain in short periods of time, leading to increased runoff, erosion, and flooding.
Forests of the Piedmont and Laurel Cliff will be affected by climate change because with rising temperatures, plants respire faster, and which means energy will be used more, and water loss from transpiration will also be increased. Warming temperatures can stress plants as they are increasingly outside their range of tolerance. Stressed trees are vulnerable trees, increasing the forest's susceptibility to insects, pests, and diseases. Additionally, as temperatures rise, pests and diseases may expand their ranges into our Piedmont forests, posing new threats. Another impact of climate change is the increased risk of wildfires, which is exacerbated by the increase in droughts. Higher temperatures increase evaporation, making everything drier and more susceptible to high-intensity fires. High-intensity fires burn everything from root to crown, reducing food and cover wildlife and decreasing forest resilience.
In the northern section of the Laurel Cliff property, there are several tracts of loblolly and Virginia pine ready for harvest. Monacan citizens often identify themselves as woodland people, and fittingly, healthy forest management is a key priority. We recommend that the Monacan Indian Nation contact the Virginia Department of Forestry to develop a forest stewardship management plan. This comprehensive plan will give the Monacan direction and help them work towards our goals of climate change resilience, agroforestry, and forest health. In most areas, the Monacan want to improve or preserve the forest. So to get started, we recommend a shade tree cut in the form of a series of thinnings, with the first being a large cut of most of the trees, followed by two smaller thinnings to get rid of the rest of the pine. To better protect aquatic resources and provide a corridor for wildlife, a riparian buffer will remain around creeks and ponds of the DOF's 35 feet, recommended 35 feet. A thinning or a shade tree cut means a less abrupt change in the forest, and it provides food and shelter for wildlife. A second benefit is leaving some mature trees to shade sprouting and newly planted seedlings. We recommend a shade-tolerant species like oaks and hickories to restore the forest to its historical biodiversity, increase food for the wildlife in Monacan, and lay the foundation for our food forest, which we will be discussing later. This initial harvest also provides immediate income for the Monacan.
Monacan Indians, like many other indigenous tribes, likely historically utilized controlled burns in the land to manage their environment. Burning areas to encourage the growth of desired food plants, improve hunting grounds, and facilitate easier travel by clearing thick vegetation. It is believed that many indigenous people utilize fire every 1 to 3 years to maintain their environment and to optimize habitat for game animals. This resulted in a mosaic of forests in different successional stages, promoting biodiversity and creating edge habitats. Rather than a new and untamed land like many early colonists believed, the forests of Virginia would have been highly managed by significant modification by the indigenous people.
In order to conduct a controlled burn, a certified prescribed burn manager and a written prescribed burn plan are necessary. Expertise and input for the plan can come from the Department of Wildlife Resources and the Virginia Department of Forestry. Anyone can be trained to become a certified burn manager through a 3-day program with sessions on fire behavior, smoke management, and environmental impacts. We recommend that some tribal members complete this program and become certified to maintain greater control over their land. When it's time to conduct the burn, the Department of Forestry needs to be notified, and the direct supervision is required from the certified prescribed burn manager. Additionally, Amherst County requires an on-site inspection and a permit prior to the burn.
Controlled burns have many benefits. They are low-intensity fires that safely remove fuel and thin out the understory. Believe the seed bank intact to foster new growth. This will reduce future wildfire risk, which is predicted to be worsened by climate change. Not only can controlled burns be utilized in the forested areas, but also in the abandoned and overgrazed fields. A controlled burn in these grassy areas can enrich the soil, remove non-native species, and promote the sprouting of native forbs and grasses whose seeds are just waiting for the right time within the seed bank. Controlled burns are also an effective measure in restoring native grasses, who may be more adapted to the fire than non-native species. By mimicking the natural timing of fires, native plants can be given an advantage.
Controlled burns also positively contribute to soil health. When organic materials burn, the ashes left behind contain minerals and nutrients critical to plant growth, increasing overall soil nutrient availability. Controlled burns benefit wildlife because they can be used to reset and maintain specific stages of succession to promote the growth of early successional plant species and benefit wildlife species such as white-tailed deer, rabbits, and turkey. These species are important culturally to the Monacan because they can be hunted for food. Controlled burns need to be monitored carefully to ensure they are not impacting streams. The use of riparian buffers and fire breaks, aquatic resources should not be at risk from erosion or fire after the burn. Using controlled burns at Willow Cliff is key to rejuvenating this space, increasing ecological productivity and soil health, increasing biodiversity and resilience, and reducing wildfire risk.
According to the World Health Organization, climate change affects the food availability, quality, and diversity, exacerbating food and nutrition crisis. The primary method the Monacan can promote roots and resiliency is to implement a food forest. Food forests are made to mimic natural, self-sustaining ecosystems, but are intentionally planted with a large diversity of plants with edible, medicinal, and cultural uses. Food forests have 7 layers. Planting food forests to utilize each of these 7 layers maximizes the productivity of the overall forest while promoting biodiversity.
Why should the Monacan consider implementing a food forest? The Priority Action Plan of the Monacan Indian Nation found that over 74% of surveyed tribal members believe that food sovereignty is the greatest threat facing their people. Improving access to hyperlocal food can boost indigenous health and welfare. It's clear that the Monacan want control over their food resources and want to increase connections with the land. As Ms. Elliott said, the land has always provided for us. One way to increase food sovereignty, food security, and connections to the land while reinforcing cultural practices is to grow your own food. A food forest can reduce struggles for food resources by providing nuts, berries, fruits, and more, as well as attracting animals that the Monacan can then hunt. This provides opportunities for harvest from 2 different angles. The Monacan Indian Nation Food Bank serves over 2,000 households and 5,000 individuals. The director of our local food bank says that donations of harvested materials are acceptable as long as they are cleaned properly. Additionally, the Monacan Food Bank can accept wild game that is donated through programs like Hunters for the Hungry or handled locally by approved processors.
Plants of cultural, spiritual, and medicinal value can and should be included. Leaves and berries used for medicinal teas, poultices and remedies, plants and roots used for dyeing fibers and baskets, sage and tobacco for ceremonies, as well as native honeysuckle and grapevine for cordage and basket weaving should all be considered. We recommend consulting with the knowledgeable elders of the Monacan Indian Nation and members from other Virginia tribes to determine additional plants of significance that can be incorporated. The food forest will be planted within the shade of the thin pines. In planting, it's important to consider all 7 layers and to consider native species. Native species are more adapted to microhabitats and are more likely to thrive, needing less resources and less care. They develop better and deeper root systems that can help improve soil structure and nutrient cycling, including carbon sequestration. Once established, these native plants require less water and are more resilient when faced with adverse conditions.
While many plants can be utilized, in the interest of time, here we will suggest just a few key species per layer. First, the overstory. We suggest planting oaks, hickories, persimmons, and wild cherry to form the initial canopy. Once established, these species will provide shade to lower layers. In the understory, fruit-bearing trees, such as downy serviceberry, native plum trees, such as the American plum or Chickasaw plum, hackberry, bladdernut, and pawpaw can be implemented. In the shrub and herbaceous layer can be planted with common elderberry, and northern spicebush. For ground cover, plants like wild oregano or dittany and native honeysuckle can be planted. The rhizosphere is the root layer. Increasing the diversity of plants increases the overall health and diversity of the microbes and fungi here. Additionally, we recommend native ferns, wild ginger, and cucumber root. Finally, in the vertical layer, we recommend maypop and native grapes. Several varieties of native grapes were cultivated by indigenous people for food and medicine, as well as to make thread, cordage, and baskets. Again, many more species can and will be utilized within each layer. Tribal elders and native plant specialists from the Department of Forestry, the Natural Heritage Program through the Virginia Department of Conservation and Recreation, the Department of Agriculture and Consumer Services, and Hill City's Virginia Master Gardeners can provide more expertise in choosing the right species for the specific location and use.
By planting native and historically used species, the food forest represents a community space that encourages the preservation of cultural practices and intergenerational knowledge sharing to teach future generations about foraging and harvesting, and also hunting and trapping. Tribal member we spoke to, and 67% of surveyed tribal members indicate that wildlife management for hunting and fishing should also be a priority. Agroforestry increases native plants that will provide food not only for the people, but also for the wildlife, as well as shelter and habitat. Deer, bear, squirrels, native pollinators, and more will be attracted to the food sources and increase cover, increasing the activity and populations at Little Cliff. As populations grow, so does sustainable harvesting of these culturally important species. Increasing hunting and trapping enhances the Monacan to take part in cultural practices as well as strengthening food sovereignty.
Monacan Indian Nation Climate Action Plan includes desires such as carefully managing the forest owned by the nation to maximize natural carbon sequestration, ecosystem health, forage, and food species, replanting with climate-resilient native species, planting for regenerative agriculture, and food diversity and food forestry in service of both the people and the ecosystem. A food forest helps meet all of these goals. Forests can be managed to maximize their carbon storage because plants store carbon in all of their tissue, in their stems, roots, and leaves. According to the USDA, an individual tree can sequester up to 10 kilograms of carbon per year. Because food forests have high diversity and a layered structure, they can sequester 10 to 12 tons of carbon per acre annually.
Besides carbon sequestration, food forests help the Monacan enhance many environmental aspects of their land. A growing forest provides organic material to the forest floor that helps trap and retain moisture and provide microhabitat to soil organisms. Over time, the breakdown of leaves leads to deeper, more productive, and nutrient-rich soils. Roots of plants also help prevent erosion and trap and filter runoff. A managed food forest will provide more food and habitat for wildlife than a monoculture pine stand. Broadleaf trees will provide more shade for streams, cooling them and enhancing oxygen retention, as well as providing leaf litter for macroinvertebrates that then provide food for trout and other species of fish.
How about a timeline? The Monacan Indian Nation needs to be started as soon as possible. With expertise from professionals, they can get help prioritizing their actions and begin. The Monacan should begin by contacting the Virginia Department of Forestry to talk with foresters about their goals for the property, developing a forest stewardship plan, a prescribed burn plan, and a timber harvesting plan. First, the pine stands need to be thinned for a shade tree cut. This can be done any season, but this harvest needs to be done so the food forest can be implemented. This cut gives the Monacan capital, an estimated $130,000 to help move forward and alleviate any potential economic challenges.
Once the pine stands have been prepped, the Monacan can begin planting portions of the food forest. Many native plants can be planted in the spring, summer, and fall. However, fall planting of perennials is advantageous because of cooler temperatures and increased rainfall allow them to develop stronger root systems, giving them a head start for growth in the following spring. Over the winter, when conditions are right, prescribed burns can be conducted in the fields and some forested areas. In the following spring, the food forest can be monitored for growth and survival, and more plants can be added to supplement needs in any of the 7 layers.
The Virginia Department of Wildlife Resources should be contacted to discuss best management practices for counting, monitoring, and harvesting game species. Virginia Save Our Streams can be contacted for volunteers to perform biological monitoring of streams on the property and to set up instruction for the Monacan tribal members to receive this free training and continue to assess their own water quality.
The timber harvest will provide capital, but there are also grants, cost shares, and programs that can be used to offset costs. The DOF has a tree seedling nursery where many seedlings can be purchased at high volume and low cost. including many of the fruit and nut trees which we suggest. The DOF Hardwood Initiative Cost Share can help save money on cost of replanting and for maintenance of newly planted forests. The DOF and the United States Department of Agriculture have a community forest revitalization program that can provide technical assistance for funding, sourcing, selecting, and planting trees. There are also tax cuts for food source seedlings, particularly for agroforestry. Additionally, grants are available through the Department of Interior and U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service to restore forest diversity that promotes wildlife habitat.
The Monacan have applied for grants through the EPA's General Assistance Program, the Priority Climate Action Plan, and the Environmental Engineering Inflation Reduction Act to assist with programs at Little Cliff related to agricultural brownfields, land improvements, and for dam renovation to improve fishing access and habitat at Hummingbird Lake.
Another source of funding would be the Virginia Wildlife Grant Program through the Department of Wildlife Resources and the Wildlife Foundation of Virginia. This program provides funding to organizations with a mission of connecting people to the outdoors and supports activities such as wildlife viewing and hunting. The Monacans would be prioritized for this program because of their interest in recruiting, retaining, and reactivating interest in hunting and cultural practices related to other game harvesting. Finally, the Monacan can apply for a Community Wildfire Defense Grant through the USDA, which is used to assist Indian tribes planning and mitigating for wildfire risks. Funds can be used to restore and maintain landscapes as well as take action to prevent wildfires.
With any major project, challenges should be anticipated. By consulting with expert foresters and land managers, many challenges can be addressed before they arise. One environmental challenge that may develop is another summer drought like we've had in the previous 2 years. If this occurs, new plants will need to be monitored and potentially watered. Native plants are more drought tolerant, and they can be mulched and supplied with watering bags to help alleviate this potential problem.
There should not be any political challenges, although climate change has become politically charged. This can be frustrating because of the overwhelming amount of scientific evidence, but the Monacan must place themselves and their future as a priority. Many environmental actions the Monacan consider also have other positive impacts, not just mitigating the impacts of climate change. There are no legislative or regulatory concerns regarding planting trees, and any about controlled burns will be addressed through the prescribed burn management plan. Neighbors can be notified ahead of time. For a long time, neighbors looked down on and discriminated against the Monacan, but over time, relations have greatly improved because they are now seeing the positive impacts the Monacan are contributing. The Monacan continue to improve relations by offering internships for local college students, hosting community work days, and hosting open houses.
Social challenges can be minimized by consulting Monacan Indian Nation tribal members about their desires for the Lower Cliff property. According to UNDRIP, the United Nations Declaration of Rights of Indigenous People have the right to decide how they wish to develop their lands and resources. We have visited the Monacan Museum, read our story and Monacan Millennium, and attended public lectures by tribal members to gain insight, but members must be continuously consulted and allowed input.
Another social challenge is that cultural practices and historical knowledge once common in indigenous peoples have been lost or forgotten. Many have lost their connection with the land, and it will take time to regain this knowledge. We suggest that the Monacan work with other tribal nations like the Upper Mattapony tribe that have established community gardens and partner with local schools. Nation building, community involvement, and shared knowledge benefit everyone.
The Monacan Indian Nation wants to develop its environmental programs and plan for a sustainable future, reconnecting people to the land now and for future generations. The prescribed burns and a food forest give the Monacan the roots and resiliency they need to move forward.
In the cost of indecision, nothing changes. The Monacan continue to face food insecurity and loss of cultural practices. Implementing a food forest at Laurel Cliff is achieving a cultural space where the Monacan Indian Nation can put down roots for their own future, their own impact on climate change, their own food security, and a chance to regain traditional cultural practices and encourage intergenerational and intertribal knowledge sharing for resiliency. We hope that the Monacan Indian Nation sees what a huge opportunity a food forest can be.
We thank you for your time and now open the floor for your questions.
Team, your time was 19 minutes and 32 seconds. Judges, that's all 5 points on your final question. We're resetting the clock. We now have 5 minutes for judges.
Sorry,
Judges, your time is
Okay.
starting.
Is there a cost associated to become a certified burn manager?
No, there's no cost. It's a free program that anyone can apply for.
Cue the Jeopardy music. You want to finish your question from the first
I
time?
don't remember. I know I was in the middle of asking one, and I was trying to remember the entire time you guys were talking, and I couldn't remember where I was going with it. Do you guys remember where I was going with it?
I don't. It was too long.
I know it was about the burning, and I just don't know what specifically I was curious about, unfortunately.
Judges, are there any other questions? Going once? Going twice? All right, team, thank you so much.